I am delighted to be back again for lecture number 2 of 3. And I would like to look at Measure for Measure. Now, I don't want anyone to be worrying that this is a play that they don't know very well or that they're not comfortable with. This is a play that I will take you by the hand with and take you through it. So panic not, panic not. So I hope you can all see my presentation there. I'm hoping. Yes, Paula's nodded. If she says it's okay, then it's okay. All righty. So this little addendum here, Sex and the City, Sin and Salvation and Measure for Measure. That was Tom's idea. Again, credit where credit's due, putting the Sex and the City bit in. So this is a play that I said I will take you through, and I hope it will provoke a lot of questions and discussion in our second half. So let's get going. Okay. So of all of Shakespeare's plays, arguably the most overtly religious one is one that in my opinion does not get the recognition and the exposure it deserves. Written in around 1604, Measure for Measure comes after most of Shakespeare's big hits. By this point in his career, we've already had Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, Henry V, A Midsummer Night's Dream, with Othello in the works, and Macbeth following a year or so later. Shakespeare averaged around 2 to 3 plays a year. Not bad for a boy from the provinces who never went to university and who knew a little Latin and less Greek, according to the eulogy fellow playwright Ben Jonson composed after Shakespeare's death. There's nothing quite like airing your professional jealousy at your far more famous and successful colleague now that he's dead and can't answer back. Shakespeare's 37 plays tend to be classified into three broad groups, comedy, tragedy, and history. And you can see these 3 categories on the contents page of Shakespeare's original complete works. So I'm just going to see, there we go. There's one more person in the waiting room. There we go, just admitting them. Okay, so here are the 3 categories, comedy, tragedy, and history. The comedies tend to feature young lovers, mistaken identity, quips and wordplay, and a happily ever after, although these are not simplistic, Disneyfied happy endings, as we will see shortly. The tragedies always begin with a moral problem of some kind that is happening to high-status individuals. In Hamlet, a prince must decide whether to avenge his father's murder without damning his own soul. Talking of Disney, by the way, if any of you have ever watched The Lion King, then you have, of course, watched Hamlet. It's exactly the same story. In Macbeth, a loyal nobleman is tempted to commit regicide for power, and he gives in to that temptation. In Julius Caesar, a Roman statesman struggles with whether assassinating his friend and his ruler is justified to save the Republic. In King Lear, an aging king must determine how to divide his kingdom among his daughters without sowing betrayal and chaos, and so on and so forth. You get the idea. In tragedy land, though, the moral problem is usually only resolved with a nice big pile of bodies at the end. The Shakespearean tragedy with the highest body count goes to one of his very earliest efforts, Titus Andronicus, where we have 14 dead bodies, including the eponymous hero's daughter, Lavinia, who has her hands cut off and her tongue torn out, so she cannot speak or write the name of the 2 brothers who have raped and mutilated her. Fortunately, this is ancient Rome, so justice is swift and brutal, and her attackers are not only apprehended by Titus, but are strung up from the ceiling by their feet, their throats slit like animals for sacrifice, with Lavinia catching the blood in a bowl underneath, and they are then chopped up into tiny pieces and baked into pies by Titus, who in the next scene gets the superb stage direction, "Enter Titus dressed like a cook." He then promptly serves the pies to the boy's mother, Tamara, Queen of the Goths, who eats it for some time before she realises. Apparently, in this case, revenge is a dish best served piping hot. Shakespeare's history plays tend to focus largely on the medieval English kings, and there's a little timeline for you there, from Richard II back in 1399, all the way up to Henry VIII in 1536. And this was one of the most turbulent times in English history. If we have any Game of Thrones fans in the house, by the way, the conflict between the two key Plantagenet houses of York and Lancaster for control of the English throne was the basis for George R.R. Martin's story. You can see some of the character equivalents here. And he, of course, he shamelessly borrowed a huge amount from the tumultuous Wars of the Roses, not least the names of York and Lancaster for the names of his two big rival houses, House Stark and House Lannister. This tripartite structure of comedy, tragedy, and history worked well enough for a few centuries, but there were always plays that did not easily slot into these designations. Several of the history plays can reasonably be classified as tragedies due to the body count and the soaring epic speeches of the tragic monarchs who realize too late that they have erred and must pay the price for their foolishness. There are also several comedies that contain deeply uncomfortable behaviour, yet the characters seem to turn a blind eye to this for the sake of a happy ending. One memorable example of this comes from his sparkling comedy Much Ado About Nothing, whereby the clever and witty Beatrice and Benedick, who dated a while back but broke up, are tricked by their friends into loving one another again. Here you can see a screenshot from the excellent 1995 production, film starring Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson, who were actually married at the time of filming. So that adds a lovely extra frisson to their repartee. This production, by the way, is freely available on YouTube. So just type in Much Ado About Nothing 1995 and you can watch it. It's really a cracking version of the play. Beatrice and Benedick's sizzling chemistry is undeniable, and watching their poorly disguised love and desire for each other rekindle is a genuine pleasure. But there is a shadow over this joyous plotline. Beatrice's cousin Hero, a sweet, harmless girl, is cruelly jilted at the altar by a man who wrongly suspects her of adultery after listening to the whisperings of a man he does not know is his enemy. Against all reason, Hero, living up to her name, takes this man back at the end of the play, after he has been chastened with the belief that her grief at being jilted caused her to die. Now, I doubt any of us would counsel our girlfriends or daughters to take back a man who had thrown her to the floor and called her a whore in church in front of all her friends and family. The designation of comedy now feels somewhat hollow. We come to realize that sometimes a comedy may simply be a play where nobody dies, not where everyone is happy. Because of these thematic difficulties, a fourth category of Shakespeare play was created about 200 years ago, that of the problem play. And there are 4 plays that have been given this designation: The Winter's Tale, Measure for Measure, The Merchant of Venice, which we will deal with next week, and All's Well That Ends Well. These problem plays, often coming later in Shakespeare's career, blend dark themes with comic elements and often leave difficult moral questions unresolved. They typically focus on ethical dilemmas, sexual politics, social corruption, and have ambiguous endings. In other words, these plays resist easy moral closure. We're not sure who deserves redemption, or if anyone does at all, and the endings feel more unsettling than celebratory, hence the term problem. However, in the 1623 First Folio, which was the first full publication of all of Shakespeare's plays, and in my opinion, one of the world's most important books in shaping English language and culture, these 4 plays are classified as comedies. In case you're in the market, the First Folio is also considered one of the most valuable works of literature in a monetary sense. So if you wish to purchase one of the 82 First Folios that the Folger possesses, you will need to bring a very large wheelbarrow to DC to carry the $10 million necessary to purchase one of these texts. The title for Measure is, of course, a direct reference to the Sermon on the Mount, found in the Gospel of Matthew. A discourse filled with radical ethical teachings that contrast self-righteous judgment with humility, mercy, and personal repentance. Within it, Jesus warns us, "Judge not, that ye be not judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again." This beatitude warns against hypocritical judgment, condemning others while ignoring our own faults. Jesus is not forbidding moral discernment entirely, but he is condemning the failure to judge oneself first. Shakespeare continues this line of thought in his play. He asks the question, what do we do with sin? Ours and that of others. Do we demand strict justice or do we offer mercy? The key section of the play I want to focus on today comes from Act 2. But before we dive in, a little background on the setup. So, for getting his girlfriend Julia pregnant before they wed, Claudio is sentenced to death by Vienna's deputy Angelo, who is experiencing his first taste of power. So Angelo decides to celebrate by enforcing lapsed morality laws with sudden and disturbing zeal. Naturally distressed, Claudio's sister Isabella, a novice nun, comes to Angelo to plead passionately for her brother's life, despite her disapproval of his premarital relations. In their dialogue, Isabella embodies Christian mercy and grace, whereas Angelo represents rigid justice, the letter of the law. Their discussion in Act 2, Scene 2 is the section I want to focus on today, as it is an excellent representation of the competing moral imperatives that govern all our perspectives. Should we judge or not judge? Should we be strict or kind? I'm going to read the extract aloud, as I think it's easier to get a sense of the scene that way. Your brother is a forfeit of the law, and you but waste your words. Alas, why all the souls that were forfeit once, and he that might the vantage best have took found out the remedy. How would you be if he, which is the top of judgment, should but judge you as you are? Oh, think on that, and mercy then will breathe within your lips like man new made. Be you content, fair maid. It is the law, not I, condemn your brother. Were he my kinsman, brother, or my son, it should be thus with him. He must die tomorrow. Tomorrow? Oh, that's sudden. Spare him. He's not prepared for death. Even for our kitchens we kill the fowl of season. Shall we serve heaven with less respect than we do minister to our gross selves? Good, my lord, bethink you. Who is it that hath died for the offence? There's many have committed it. The law hath not been dead, though it hath slept. Those many had not dared to do that evil if the first that did in that edict infringe had answered for his deed. Now it is awake, takes note of what is done, and like a prophet looks in a glass that shows what future evils, either new or by remissness new conceived, and so in progress to be hatched and born, are now to have no successive degrees, but ere they live, to end. Yet show some pity. No, I show it most of all when I show justice. For then I pity those I do not know, which as a dismissed offence would after gall, and do him right, that answering one foul wrong, lives not to act another. Be satisfied. Your brother dies tomorrow. Be content. So you must be the first that gives this sentence, and he that suffers? Oh, it is excellent to have a giant's strength, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant. Could great men thunder as Jove himself does, Jove would ne'er be quiet. For every pelting petty officer would use his heaven for thunder, nothing but thunder. Merciful heaven, thou rather with thy sharp and sulphurous bolt splits the unwedgeable and gnarled oak than the soft myrtle. Ah, but man, proud man, dressed in a little brief authority, most ignorant of what he is most assured. His glassy essence, like an angry ape, plays such fantastic tricks before high heaven as would make angels weep, who with our spleens would all laugh themselves mortal. Isabella's undeniably persuasive arguments are deeply rooted in Christian teaching, and her very first words in this exchange are explicitly Pauline. She asserts that all humanity stands condemned, echoing Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Her argument is built on the concept of original sin. Because of Adam and Eve's poor choices in Eden, we are all considered forfeit before divine law. The he who found the remedy to this is clearly Christ, the second Adam, who will right the errors of the first Adam. Jesus becomes the one who chooses to offer redemption to us, even though he is justly able to condemn us. Isabella's subsequent reminder of the beatitude not to judge others is explicit, as it is this fear of being held to account that stays our hand when our first primal instincts may be to take revenge or express righteous or self-righteous anger. Angelo replies, "It is the law, not I, condemn your brother." Here, Angelo shifts moral responsibility away from himself and onto the law. This kind of detachment reflects the view that the law is objective, impersonal, and this is a view that is echoed in parts of the Old Testament legal codes, such as those found in Leviticus. But this is an enormously convenient excuse to abdicate responsibility of the choices Angelo is making. Remember, he is choosing to enforce a long-lapsed law on public morality that no one has bothered about for generations. We've all heard equivalent statements of this weaselly excuse in our own lives. I was just enforcing the rules, I don't make them, I'm just doing my job. Or most famously, about 80 years ago in Germany, I was just following orders. Angelo is trying to separate himself from the consequences of the law he chooses to enforce, and in so doing falls victim to the Pharisaical error, enforcing the letter of the law while denying the spirit, just like the Pharisees did. Now, anybody who has ever stood up in a classroom knows one single immutable truth. If you don't go in hard at the start of the academic year, then you will spend the rest of the year at the mercy of a badly behaved class, full of regret that you weren't tougher in the beginning. In my first year of teaching, my head teacher even told me, "Don't smile till Christmas." And about 30 years before me, my mother was told exactly the same thing by her head teacher. So this is clearly generational wisdom that's being passed down from age to age. There's a certain wisdom to this approach because our students must know that we mean business. And the only way to do that is to be willing to stand our ground and hold firm, otherwise we'll never get anything done. We see ourselves as enforcing discipline not to be cruel, but for greater ends, such as the achievement of good grades, the development of self-discipline in children, etc. But Angelo seems to be of the don't smile ever, even several Christmases later school, and he's going to be the swift bringer of justice, like Michael with his sword. I'm hoping we can all see the irony in Angelo's name here. Isabella's horror at the nature of the justice is further compounded by the speed with which the sentence is to be carried out. Tomorrow! Oh, that is sudden. Spare him, spare him. He's not prepared for death. Remember, he is a young man. He is a young man. Its haste and indifference is yet another reason the law is too severe, in her opinion. Watch, therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour. But it seems to have come for Claudio, despite the fact he's not ready and that execution without spiritual preparation may condemn a soul. Isabella makes the argument that even common birds are killed of season with care. Shall not a human soul be granted more? This is an argument for mercy as dignity, a respect for the soul's eternal destiny. Isabella is concerned for her brother's soul being given so little time to prepare itself for death. She is clearly implying here that Angelo would have not just Claudio's blood on his hands, but he would be responsible for the eternal damnation of a fellow Christian, and that therefore this would also stain Angelo's soul. Isabella's attack continues now by critiquing the proportionality of the punishment. Who is it that hath died for the offence? There's many have committed it. This couplet drives home a key idea in Christian theology, the universality of sin. Isabella doesn't deny Claudio's guilt, but she insists that he is not alone in it. Her argument is clear. If the law were fully applied in every instance, many would die, and this would create a greater injustice. The fact that Vienna is overrun with pimps, whores, and brothels, yet it is this nice young man who wants to marry the girl of his dreams who's targeted, hardly seems fair. As far as Isabella is concerned, Claudio has not deserved such treatment because he has not sinned in a way that merits such a dreadful response. Its selectively applied nature makes it all the more unjust. Shakespeare also uses this idea in Hamlet when the bumbling court official Polonius tells Hamlet that he will treat a visiting company of players to the court according to their desert. Hamlet promptly savages him for this inhumane remark, remarking, "God's bodkin, man, much better. Use every man after his desert, and who should escape whipping?" We have all said and done things of which we are ashamed and for which we deserve a whipping, but did not get one. But knowing that others who also deserve that whipping brings us some comfort we do not sin in splendid isolation. But if we knew that there were others who deserved a whipping but didn't get it, then that would rankle with us. Equally, we're also uncomfortable knowing that not all whippings are equal and that some people get whipped an awful lot harder for the same crimes that we ourselves commit. There is also a delightful irony that Shakespeare, of all authors, creates a couple in this situation, because the 18-year-old boy from Stratford had to procure a special marriage license from the Bishop of Worcester to expedite his wedding to 25-year-old Anne Hathaway to prevent a scandal, because baby Susanna was born a mere 6 months after the wedding, and we can all count. So, Angelo's rebuttal is one of chilling rationality. His metaphor of the law sleeping suggests latent power, now ready to assert itself. He invokes a deterministic logic. If the law had been enforced earlier, then fewer would sin now, just like in our classrooms when we have to go in hard in September. But Angelo is not interested in proportion or mercy. He would sentence all of Vienna gladly. One gets the feeling that he would have been all for the flood in Genesis, where the idea of communal punishment is meant to curb communal sin. But anybody who's ever been included in a teacher's whole class punishment, even though they did nothing wrong themselves, knows how deeply unfair this is. In Angelo's mind, justice is mercy because it protects future victims. This is a highly utilitarian viewpoint, so the principle of the greatest good for the greatest number. But it is deeply flawed from a Christian point of view because true mercy in biblical thought is not pragmatic, but is lovingly offered instead. Angelo's pity is for an abstract future society, not the real flesh and blood people in front of him, whereas Isabella can see individual souls as infinitely valuable and worthy of grace, which is how all of us would wish to be viewed when judgment comes for us. The discipline that is insisted upon in the law is theoretically a positive thing. It curbs the worst excesses of human nature and allows everyone to live more safely. In theory, laws are there for the good of everyone, but there are many times when this simply isn't the case. Laws are human constructs, and when enforced without discernment or compassion, they can uphold injustice rather than correct it. Treating the law as immutable and beyond reproach is fraught with danger because it assumes that all laws are inherently just. But the law once said that blacks were to be enslaved, Jews were to be rounded up and deported to their deaths, and women were to be prevented from participating fully in their own societies. St. Augustine wrote, "Lex injusta non est lex." An unjust law is not a law. Therefore, we have reasonable grounds to protest and even disobey such laws. After all, if everyone had obeyed those unjust laws, then we would still have them in place. Sometimes, to quote Dickens, the law is an ass. And this is as clear to Isabella as it was to Jean Valjean in Les Miserables, who was imprisoned for 5 years for stealing bread to feed his family. And it was also clear to Atticus Finch, who stood up in a courtroom to defend a man he knew would never be found innocent in 1950s rural Alabama. But by Angelo insisting upon strict punishment for breaking the law, he's also missing the most central tenet of Christian faith, that somebody has already died for our sins, so why should anybody else? Considering this, Angelo's hard-headed approach seems not only cruel, but positively blasphemous in its self-importance. Who the hell does he think he is? He is also clearly forgetting the Epistle of James, where we are reminded that judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been merciful. In our New Testament world, though, we need not be so worried by hard-headed justice anymore, because we have been saved by the actions of one innocent man who sacrificed himself so all may have hope of redemption, and therefore we can all approach our lives a little more hopefully. A fact that was so memorably encapsulated for us by Monty Python in the superb Life of Brian film, where we are exhorted to always look on the bright side of life. The question of what is considered proportionate punishment is one that people and societies wrestle with daily, from how to discipline our children appropriately, right up to the justice dispensed in criminal courts. When you are the one dispensing justice, how do you go about it? Do you err on the side of harshness to deter future infractions? Maybe you shout at or smack your child, or do you hand down the death penalty in court? Or are such reactions disproportionate, barbaric and vindictive, more interested in soothing our hurt feelings and satisfying our need for payback than actually restoring the balance? There is a very good reason why juries never include relatives of victims. Now, at this point, it would be tempting to write Angelo off as a one-note Puritan, the Renaissance incel who's uptight about sex and compensating for not getting laid by bossing everyone else about. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, the Puritan movement was gathering steam in Shakespeare's England. They were staunch moral reformers, determined to rid society of perceived vice, frivolity, and corruption, particularly in the theatre, which they viewed as sinful. So it is no coincidence that Shakespeare gives Angelo a moral vocabulary that echoes this worldview: strict, inflexible, and obsessed with external purity. Some of those Puritans, of course, decided to get on a boat and decided to build a new country that is, to this day, devoid completely of vice, frivolity, and corruption. But of course, anybody who has ever encountered Arthur Miller's classic drama, The Crucible, will recall the devastating results of adhering to strict moral codes due to fear of punishment. In many ways, Angelo is the play's anti-Christ figure, not in the demonic sense, but in that he stands opposed to the model of mercy and forgiveness that Christ exemplifies. Angelo's zeal for moral law has less to do with spiritual health and more to do with performance, with being seen to be righteous. This aligns with Christ's rebuke of the Pharisees in Matthew 23. "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead." This is precisely Angelo's spiritual disease. He is a man of whitewashed tombs. I think it is important at this point to reveal what Angelo does next with Isabella's pleading. Once she leaves, he muses on how persuasive he has found her, but it turns out that it wasn't just her words that were beguiling to him. He makes Isabella an appalling offer the next day. "She can redeem thy brother by yielding up thy body to my will." When Isabella naturally recoils at this, she threatens him by saying, "Sign me a present pardon for my brother, or with an outstretched throat I'll tell the world what man thou art." And in a horrifically familiar refrain that men throughout history have uttered to frighten women into silence, Angelo chillingly replies, "And who will believe thee, Isabel?" Thankfully, though, the time when powerful men abused their authority to exploit vulnerable young women and hide from the consequences is now long gone, and we're in a much better society now. This is Angelo's central problem. He demands perfection from others while hiding or denying the corruption within himself. On the surface, he is austere, controlled, a paragon of civic virtue. You can see this image here on the PowerPoint. I think this was taken from an Australian production. You see Angelo on the left there. He is almost always presented in very, very sharply tailored suits. He's got the cravat buttoned up there. You can see the waistcoat, the jacket, the shirt, everything. He is always presented as very physically restrained as well, to match his austere language. But the moment Angelo is tempted, not even by seduction, Isabella's not trying to seduce him at all, she's begging for her brother's life, his repressed desires surge to the surface. What's revealing is that he doesn't merely desire Isabella, he desires her chastity, the very thing he claims to uphold. It is not lust alone that motivates him, but a hunger to dominate virtue, to test it and corrupt it. This internal collapse reveals that Angelo's Puritanism is not rooted in true holiness, but in fear and repression. He is not sinless, he is merely frightened of his sin. And rather than accept this and wrestle with his fallen nature, he projects his guilt onto others and tries to purge society of what he fears in himself. Angelo is also Shakespeare's warning against the dangers of moral absolutism. The problem with it is, of course, it creates brittle people. As soon as Angelo's mask slips, he has no internal reservoir of grace to draw upon. He becomes, in a matter of moments, the very thing he condemns. But unlike Isabella, who extends mercy, he wants to cover it up, lie, and let Claudio die to protect his reputation. Shakespeare, ever suspicious of performative virtue, gives Angelo the most damning trait a man can have in his moral universe: the inability to tell the truth about himself to himself. Isabella's final push in their dialogue contains some of Shakespeare's most memorable ideas and images. Her observation that, it is excellent to have a giant's strength, but it is tyrannous to use it like a giant, is one of Shakespeare's most famous aphorisms about power abused. True power should be used to serve, not condemn, control, or intimidate. Politicians of the world, take note. She sees the thought through to its logical conclusion. If everyone in any position of authority stretched their power to its fullest extent, then we would all become petty tyrants, hurling our self-righteous, condemnatory thunderbolts at each other. In the same way that the slave who drove the chariot of a successful military commander in a victory parade through ancient Rome would continually whisper to him, "Memento mori," remember you are mortal. So Isabella reminds us that all men are dressed in a little brief authority, understanding so little about what we are convinced of, forgetting how fragile, glassy our essence, our time, and our power really is. This final rhetorical flourish critiques the very heart of human pride, and it is a speech that could sit comfortably beside the warnings of Isaiah, the sermons of Jesus, or the letters of Paul. Towards the end of this play, Shakespeare presents us with another jilted fiancé who comes to the fore and exercises divine forgiveness. Angelo's former fiancée Mariana, who by the way was dumped because her fortune was lost, nice, she begs that Angelo be forgiven his harshness, arguing with much more eloquence than he deserves that the best men are moulded out of faults, and for the most become much more the better for being a little bad. This beautiful expression of redemptive hope after his sin has been exposed and judgment hangs over him allows Angelo a path back to salvation, illustrating that even those who fall can rise again, reshaped into something better. At the end of the play, Mariana and Angelo marry, Claudio lives, hurrah, and weirdest of all, Isabella is proposed to by the Duke, who has been off having a gap year. And he wanted to see how Angelo would perform with a taste of power. And he's been in disguise as a monk, don't ask. So he comes back and he proposes marriage to Isabella because he's so moved by how smart she is. And I think, you don't know this woman. Anyway, never stopped Romeo and Juliet, did it? Isabella, though, does not reply when the Duke proposes to her. And for me, that silence speaks volumes. In Oscar Wilde's famous play, The Importance of Being Earnest, the eccentric governess Miss Prism famously observed that the good end happily and the bad unhappily. That is what fiction means. But we don't have that kind of certainty at the end of this play. Who is truly punished and who is truly happy? Again, the designation comedy now feels somewhat hollow. In a culture quick to condemn and slow to forgive, Measure for Measure forces us to ask, what does true justice look like? We've seen Angelo's story unfold again and again in the press. How many times have we seen a man who enforces public virtue only to be exposed by his private vice? We all despise hypocrisy, but are we not also guilty of it ourselves? This play also challenges the other side of the coin. How do we respond when someone else falls? Are we to cast them out forever into a hinterland, patting ourselves on the back for upholding the highest moral standards? Or do we believe in second chances, in repentance, and in transformation? Shakespeare doesn't offer a political policy or a legal framework here. What he offers instead is more radical, a vision of human failure that doesn't end in condemnation, but in the messy, painful, difficult work of forgiveness, of others, and of ourselves. He reminds us that justice without mercy may look clean, but it leaves no room for redemption. And if we remove the possibility of redemption, what future are we offering anyone? This is Shakespeare's gospel, and we ignore it at our peril. Thank you very much. And with time to spare, so that's good. All righty, I'm going to end the meeting here, and then we'll jump onto the Q&A link. So I'll see you there in a second.